Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is our second session of T.A.P. I'd just like to start off with a disclaimer. Wanted to read something that was shared with me regarding pretty much how to treat different points of view and stuff. There are bound to be points of disagreement between people and even church leadership, depending on what is discussed. It is understood as part of the territory. We value free thought, discussion, and loving one another through disagreement. And a quote that was given to me was, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." So as we go through this presentation today, just have an open mind, be willing to entertain a thought, even if you don't accept it ultimately. But today's topic is going to be talking about apologetics. And we're going to be going over the basics and essentially the defense against the non-religious. So going doing an overview of what we're going to be doing. Like I said, initial necessities for apologetics, why we need to focus on the non-religious affiliated, which is most commonly the atheists and agnostics. Review common objections to God and Christianity, dismantle objections using philosophy and scientific discoveries, and then ending with a Q&A and open discussion question. So, again, kind of going over the apologetics verse, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, "Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, but with gentleness and respect." And I like to focus in on this everyone. So you must know how to answer the individual, not just their objection, because how you answer everyone is going to be different. You have to ask certain questions while you're having a discussion with them, as in, what is the root problem of the question they're asking? What are their history, beliefs, outlook on life? And always ask clarifying questions, because when they throw objections at you, most likely there is some form of misunderstanding between you guys. So always ask clarifying questions. One question to ask yourself during this is the discussion dialectic or eristic? And essentially what that means are each sides of the discussion seeking truth, or is one side seeking to ultimately win, or pretty much just make an excuse for their case? And I like what Frank Turk says when he asks people, when he's having discussions with them, if Christianity were true, would you be a Christian? Because this ultimately exposes what they're seeking. Are they really seeking truth? Or are they seeking some way to claim that Christianity is not true? Basically making some excuse for sin. And you should know that apologetics is evangelism. Don't expect instant results. You are planting the seed, and I would like to make the analogy that apologetics is watering that seed, which is required for fermentation. And that kind of goes with the parable of Mark chapter 4, verses 3 through 8. So, why do we need to focus on the agnostic and atheist group of thinking? One reason is that in Michigan, 31% of people are non-religious. And that is kind of shown here on this pie chart. And Christians make about 61%, which includes Protestants, Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses. However, when you break down the non-religious affiliated, it's 5% agnostic, 4% atheist, and 22% nothing in particular, which essentially means they don't care. They really don't want to think about the end. And this chart on the right here kind of shows the Christian diversity depending on your generation. This is data from 2021 and 2023 here, where you have the silent generation, boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And as you can see, this color here is Protestant, purple is Catholic. We have the atheist, agnostic in green, and nothing in particular in this brown color. Essentially, the younger the generation is, the more likely they are to not be Christian. So just keep that in mind. 1 out of 3 people you likely meet is nothing in particular in Michigan, and most likely if you're speaking to a younger person, they're going to be non-religious. So some objections to the non-religious affiliated throwaway Christianity is science and evolution disproves God. There's no empirical evidence for a creator and sustainer. Why would God allow suffering and evil? The God of the Old Testament is a genocidal maniac. Christians are hypocrites, and Christians have blind faith and are unintellectual. So, one of the points I want to focus on there first is science and evolution disproves God. So, one question we can ask is, say there's a situation where I come home and I notice there's a pot of water boiling on a stove, and I ask the question, why is the water on the stove boiling? Well, I call up my scientist friend and I start asking him about it. I'm like, hey, why is this water boiling? He tells me, well, the flame is an exothermic chemical reaction that is releasing the energy in the bonds of the fuel. This energy is being transferred via radiation, convection, conduction from the heat source to the water. As the heat transfer is going along, the enthalpy of the water increases until you get to this point of this liquid water vapor region. During that time, water is changing from a liquid to a vapor state, and hence the water is boiling. I say, excellent answer. And I turn to my wife and I ask her, honey, why is the water on the stove boiling? She goes, I'm making pasta for dinner. So I must ask another question. And I'll ask you guys this, are either of these answers incorrect? No. So, material sciences can explain a physical cause. However, it cannot explain the motivational causes. Empirical sciences, therefore, can neither prove nor disprove God. You can kind of go into that. So, going to what science is an evidence-based study for the universe. God, who is separate and outside of the universe, is therefore impossible to study through empirical science. In the same way, say we see a car, we can observe the car, we can look at it, we can examine it. However, we're never going to find the designer within the car. But therefore, that does not mean there is no designer. So, this is where we get to the question of, if creation was the first event ever, there could therefore be no physical cause because there was nothing physical. So what could cause the universe then? And because there could be no cause, could that mean that the universe was eternal or is eternal? So, back in 1915, Einstein's field equation of general relativity, which is shown here on the bottom left, described how the geometry of space-time is determined by the distribution of mass, energy, and momentum. Einstein added this cosmological constant, known as the fudge factor, shown as the red lambda there. He did this to correct a condition expressed in the equation that basically described that space-time must be expanding or contracting. However, the common scientific view at that time was that the universe was static, meaning that it was not expanding or contracting, which therefore meant that it was eternal. The constant therefore balanced the equation and made the universe static. However, in 1929, Edwin Hubble, an astronomer, observed a redshift phenomenon by looking at distant galaxies. And to kind of understand what this means, this is really hard to see, so I apologize. This is showing the electron shells of an atom. What happens is, when light is emitted from an atom, that means that the electron is going from a higher state to a lower state. Depending on which shell it's falling from and which element it is, it will give off a specific wavelength. As you can see here, this shows the emission spectrum of hydrogen. And hydrogen is the most common and most simple form of element in the universe. So we can see we can't really see it on here, but there's a line here, one here, and I think there's two more here somewhere. Basically, we can know that it's hydrogen based off the wavelength that it's giving. However, as we looked at distant galaxies, and the further we looked, we noticed they were being shifted, but they had the same exact patterns. So we had to ask the question, why were these wavelengths literally being stretched through the universe? So Edwin Hubble, after seeing this, showed his results to Einstein. Therefore, they concluded that the universe must be expanding. The space between spaces is literally stretching light as it's moving through the universe. After this discovery, Einstein retracted the cosmological constant from the field equation of general relativity. Einstein lamented and considered it the greatest blunder of his life. So therefore, it was concluded that the universe was expanding and not eternal. And current estimates state that the universe is 3.787 plus or minus 0.02 billion years old. And this shows here kind of the common held belief of the Big Bang expansion. So, however, there was still further speculation about the age of the universe and the type of universe we had, if it was static, as shown here, the Big Bang theory up here, and this kind of oscillating universe model here. Many scientists still held to the steady state and eternal cosmology, which was the biggest rival of the Big Bang in the 1960s. So physicists hypothesized that if we were to reverse time, the universe would shrinking instead of expanding, eventually it would go to a very small point. So therefore, all the matter in the universe would have been extremely dense, and it would have been incredibly hot. So the early universe was actually predicted to be the closest thing we have ever, not we ever observed, but closest thing in the universe to an ideal black body. So you're probably asking, what is a black body? Not many people know. A black body is an idealized physical object that absorbs all electromagnetic radiation regardless of its frequency or angle of incidence. Essentially what that means is all light is absorbed by this object completely. And the emissivity is equal to the absorptivity. Basically, you absorb a certain amount of electromagnetic radiation and then emit it as well. However, a black body is a perfect idealized form of that. And everything emits electromagnetic radiation. If I was to get an infrared camera and look at you guys, I could see the radiation you guys are giving off. So a black body is neat because it emits radiation characteristic of its temperature. As you can see here, these are all the different wavelengths we see depending on the temperature of the black body. This is the visible light spectrum. As we go to the right, it's infrared, and to the left is ultraviolet. So, because the early universe was theorized to be extremely dense, all the radiation emitted was almost instantly absorbed because there was almost no travel length for light. As it was emitted, it was pretty much absorbed by another mass particle. Therefore, the early universe would have been the closest thing we have to an ideal black body. And emission from this idealized black body could actually only happen once the universe expanded to a point to where light would have no collision, essentially. It actually had somewhere to travel. So it was hypothesized that this emission should be extremely uniform, have a long wavelength, and a temperature near absolute zero. And the reason was because the universe would have expanded from that point, so it would have stretched out whatever wavelength was produced at that time. And it was uniform because it pretty much existed everywhere in the universe at that time. So because the universe had a specific temperature, this meant the radiation would have a characteristic wavelength. Well, finally, in 1965, the cosmic microwave background radiation was finally observed. This had an incredibly long wavelength of 1.9 millimeters, and it was predicted that the original wavelength would have been 970 nanometers. The temperature was 2.725 Kelvin, which is about negative 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and is extremely uniform across the universe. The only variation we see is plus or minus 18 microkelvin. So the original temperature is predicted to be around 3,000 Kelvin or 4,940 degrees Fahrenheit. So this radiation is extremely uniform across the universe, and is predicted that this radiation originated 300,000 years after what we would consider the creation event. And basically, only the Big Bang model could actually describe why this radiation throughout the universe existed. And this here is actually an illustration of the cosmic microwave background radiation. And it can be observed anywhere. Anywhere you look, you can actually find this. So, therefore, if it is predicted that the universe must have had some sort of cause, we have to, following the laws of causality, which states every event or change in reality is the inevitable result of an antecedent or simultaneous cause. Following this law, the universe also had to have a cause. Therefore, the cause for the universe had to be external from it, which meant it's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and had to be free acting, which we'll kind of go over later. So, Aristotle did a lot of work on cause and effect, and in Aristotle's book, Metaphysics 12, discusses causes and what he considered the unmoved mover. He states that whatever moves is moved by something else. Duh. However, an infinite chain of movers does not explain the original movement. Think of it as a set of gears turning. And essentially, if all the gears are turning, but there's an infinite chain of them, it doesn't explain why they were originally turning. There has to be some source that originally began the turning sequence. Therefore, there must be a first mover, which is not caused, eternal, unchanging, has no potential, and is pure actuality. And he also said that this mover had to be a final cause, which we'll go over in just a few slides. So he stated again, like everything changes has a cause, and it can be explained through two concepts, potentiality and actuality. Potentiality is what something can become, actuality is what something presently, is. For example, a seed has the potential to become a tree, and the tree is that potential made actual. So, the unmoved mover cannot have any potential because it cannot change. So the unmoved mover has to be pure actuality. I thought there was a kind of a neat correlation in Exodus where God says, "This is what you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." Kind of saying, God is almost saying that he is pure actuality. He is, I am. So the unmoved mover is a final cause. However, he stated that it does not push the universe, it draws everything towards itself because it is perfect. And this doesn't really follow Christian orthodoxy because we believe God created the universe, that he meant to do it. But Aristotle's view kind of makes it seem as if creation was kind of an accident almost. So Aristotle claimed that there are 4 types of causes, which we can kind of explain through the example of boiling water. Material cause, which is the substance which something is made from. We can describe this for the example as the water in the pot itself, the flame, the stove. The formal cause is the design or essence that makes it that thing. Kind of the design of the pot itself or the stove, the design itself describes what it is, if that makes sense. He also described efficient cause, which is the source of change or agent that brings it about, which would be the cook or the chef. And the final cause is the goal, purpose, or end for which something exists. And for this example, we can think of cooked pasta is our final cause. It's what we desire. And like I said before, Aristotle did not have a perfect representation of the Lord. His word is not infallible, but I think it is a good, reasonable philosophy for evidence of a creator. So, another argument we can make is fine-tuning. And fine-tuning can be described as the fundamental physical constants that are precisely balanced to allow the existence of stars, planets, and ultimately life. The probability for multiple of these aspects of the universe to be life-sustaining is found to be extremely low. And we'll go over a few examples of that. first is actually the cosmological constant. And this is the same one we just talked about with Einstein's field equation of general relativity. And this value represents the energy density of space, which contributes to the outward expansion of the universe in the opposite direction to gravity. It is found that if this value were off by 1/10 in part to the 10 to the 90th, the universe would have expanded too fast for galaxies to form. The universe would have, and therefore the universe pretty much would have collapsed in on itself. If it was the opposite way around, where it was off in the other direction, it would have pretty much expanded the universe until it had a cold death, where essentially no stars could form, or it'd be dark. And to put this into the scale, this value of 1 part in 10 to the 90th, there is predicted to be 10 to the 80th subatomic particles in the universe. That includes protons, neutrons, electrons. It's just an unfathomable number. You can't see it in your head. The other example we have for fine-tuning is initial entropy. So, kind of going over what entropy is. Entropy is the measure of the amount of disorder in a material system. In thermodynamics, the more entropy there is in a closed system, which we can consider the universe as a whole as a closed system. And for those of you who don't know, a closed system can pretty much be considered any defined volume. Like I can consider my laptop a closed system. There's a certain amount of energy that goes in, a certain amount of energy that outputs. And entropy, it pretty much states that the more entropy there is, the less energy there is to do useful work. Not essentially less energy, but less energy that we can actually capture. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy in a closed system must always increase. And because the universe is a closed system, the entropy in the universe must always increase as well. So if the initial entropy of the universe was too high, galaxies, stars, and other necessities for life couldn't have formed because the universe would have been too disorganized. This example here pretty much shows you, as you can imagine, water in the solid, liquid, and gas state, and these are the molecules of water. As we go from a solid to liquid to gas, the entropy is increasing. However, as we refreeze, the entropy is not decreasing, it is still increasing, but it kind of shows you this ordered versus disordered law. And I kind of like to think of my toddler, Oliver, as a very high entropy system. The moment you introduce him into a room, the entropy is increased. I mean, if you give him an assortment of letters, they're not going to be organized anymore. They will be disorganized. So, more on initial entropy. Black holes represent an extremely high entropy state. Roger Penrose calculated the entropy of a black hole, and he compared it to the entropy state that we find within our universe. So, he said that the initial entropy could fall anywhere between these two values, the black hole and the entropy we see within our universe. He found that there are 10 to the 10th to the 123rd possibilities that would generate a black hole universe. And there are 10 to the 10th to the 101 possibilities that generate a highly ordered universe like ours. Dividing the first number by the second actually outputs the first number again because it is so much larger than the first number, which is really hard to understand because it makes it seem as they're almost the same, but that other exponent makes it a really big number. So therefore, the initial entropy of the universe was fine-tuned in 1 part in 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power, which again is unfathomable. It's an absolute crazy number. So, kind of going over Christian beliefs on the creation event. There are 3 main Christian beliefs on the age of the universe and the origins of life. First are the young earth creationists. They believe the earth, life, and the remaining universe was created in 6 literal 24-hour periods, and the universe is somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. Old earth creationists believe the universe was created roughly 13.8 billion years ago, and that God directly created living creatures and humans on earth. Finally, theistic evolutionists believe the universe is also 13.8 billion years old, and that God used the mechanism of evolution to bring life about on Earth. And I actually wanted to ask you guys, just to see a distribution, how many of you would consider yourselves young Earth creationists? Okay. How about old Earth creationists? Theistic evolutionists? Okay. But base well, the thing is, some Christians do believe in evolution, and I believe they can make arguments for it, and they can use that for defending their faith. I do not believe evolution is a viable mechanism to explain the amount of diversity we see in life, and we're going to go into that. So, evolution, also known as neo-Darwinianism, is the process of natural selection acting upon random mutations within an organism's genetic biology. Neo comes from the Greek word neos, meaning new. Basically, this theory was built off classical Darwinianism, which is essentially not natural selection, with the discovery of genetics in the 20th century. So, in order to kind of disprove evolution, you have to know the theory of evolution. So, evolution is essentially, or kind of going over what mutations are in genetic sequence. Random mutations are the result of duplication errors by generation. There are two main groups of genetic informational mutations, point and chromosomal. Point is single nucleotide changes by insertion, deletion, or swaps of base pairs resulting in minuscule changes or a non-functional protein. So essentially, as you can see up here, this would be considered a point mutation where we go from a CG sequence to a TA sequence. And again, that doesn't really have much changes to the overall genetic information for an organism. However, chromosomal mutations are the large-scale mutations through the deletion, duplication, inversion, or translocation of a segment of chromosome. And that can be shown down here. Kind of hard to see, but deletion is, as it sounds, you're deleting genetic information. Duplication is duplicating it. Insertion is pretty much moving it from one point to another. And translocation is swapping between two different chromosomes. However, there's a large information issue that I have noticed with evolution. That is, any information sequence, say DNA, subjected to random changes will always degrade before new useful information is generated. In the same way, a programmer does not seek to introduce randomness into their code because the function of the code will be destroyed a long time before new functions in the code are generated. Kind of going over a toddler example again. Say if I give a toddler those magnetic letters that you put on your fridge, I write out a sentence on there. Is it more than likely that he's going to arrange it or add letters to it that are actually going to increase the sentence or dismantle the sentence altogether while he's laughing and running away? More than likely, it's going to be dismantled. So, for macroevolution to occur, which is the species-to-species variation, new genetic information must be presented. We cannot simply reach this by duplicating or deleting information from a genetic sequence. We actually have to add genetic information. And in order to develop eyes, lungs, wrist, which is if you've probably seen this before, fish moving onto land, they would have to develop eyes, lungs, wrist joints, all of that. And for order that to happen, we'd have to have new genetic information. On top of that, genetic information pretty much makes proteins which drive cellular processes, form structural basis for muscles, bones, and support the immune system. So kind of going over that sequence of how do we go from DNA to a protein sequence. Essentially, there's two different processes, transcription and translocation, which happen in series. Transcription is the DNA creates a smaller copy of itself called mRNA, and translation is the ribosomes reading the genetic information off of the mRNA strand, and they essentially link amino acids together. And these amino acids once they get to a certain length and desire of what the mRNA is telling it to make, it'll actually fold in to make a complex 3D shape, which is a functional protein. So, how common is it for these strands of amino acids to randomly occur? So, a relatively short and stable 3D protein fold can probably be composed of about 150 amino acids. And the molecular biologist Douglas Axe from Cambridge University conducted experiments to determine the rarity of these 3 protein folds, which this is actually a computer-generated image of a protein fold. So he found that for every one DNA sequence that generates a short functional protein fold, there are an equivalent 10 to the 77th non-functional combinations that could occur, which is also a very high number, getting close to the amount of subatomic particles in the universe. So, biologists estimate, going off of old Earth creationist view, that during the estimated 3.85 billion year history of life, there have been 10 to the 40th individual organisms. And each one of these organisms would have had the chance to have this genetic mutation occur and to spread it on to the next generation. Therefore, if there are 10 to the 40th opportunities and 10 to the 77th amino acid sequences they must search for, because every time a new generation is made, there is a 10 to the 77th probability that they will inherit some new genetic information. That would be a probability of 1 in 10 to the 37th power of just one functional random mutation protein was generated throughout the history of life. And as you can see, this is put into percentage form. Very low chance, and this is throughout life, that new genetic information, functional, would actually be generated. So therefore, we can come to the conclusion that natural selection via random mutation is too improbable to create the diversity of life that we see here today. So therefore, we have to ask, where did the genetic information originate from? Inference to the best explanation is a method of reasoning to explain an event by comparing multiple hypotheses. And causal adequacy is basically a form of how we can describe what hypothesis is the most likely. And it says that causes currently known to produce the kind of effect, feature, or event in question are better candidates for the correct explanation. Therefore, we can kind of make the argument using causal adequacy that we see today that only intelligent agents have been observed to produce information. This includes the computer codes, recipes, written sentences, any information that we produce. And we're the only source of new information that's being generated. There's nowhere in nature that you can see random information being generated. So therefore, using causal adequacy, we can say the best explanation is most likely originated from an intelligent agent. So therefore, if that's the case, who is this intelligent agent? Well, the historical and biblical accounts that we have point to a man who himself claimed to be this creator. John chapter 8, verse 58 says, Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." John chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 14 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Christ Jesus is this creator and sustainer that we believe to be the intelligent designer. And he gave himself so that we may be in his kingdom forever. Just crazy to think about. All of these crazy probabilities that we see, fine-tuning of the universe. He was the one that did it, but it was almost no work for him. And he sacrificed himself so we may be with him. It shows you the value that each one of you has. So to conclude, in order to be effective, know who you are evangelizing to. The non-religious affiliated make up the largest percentage of the unsaved in Michigan. Material science cannot explain the motivational causes. Intelligent design is the most robust theory for the origin of the universe, life, and information. And Jesus Christ is the intelligent designer and savior of our souls. Any questions? That's the goal.
I don't know what to ask.
Well, sorry for the fire hydrant, but you know,
It's possible to please.
it's impossible to what?
To please God.
To please. Yeah.
I'm sure how to explain it. Reading a book in Bible college that I totally didn't get. And it took it to the prof and I said, I did this. He said, "That's not faith." Well, yep, sure.
Right. Yeah, there's always going to be some form of mystery. You're never going to know it all. I mean, until you meet him face to face, he can probably tell you, but there's always going to be unknowns out there. You have to, everyone has faith. Even the atheists have faith. You know, how can they have faith enough to think that their mind that they believe originated through a random process is capable of thinking at all or thinking correctly? They have faith in it. So, good point. Yeah.
Describe more or less the atheist or agnostic when they say, well, how can you have faith in something that you can't perceive? I would fire back at them, well, time, faith, matter were created without actually knowing what was created. And you have the faith in that had to be finding truth. So you have no proof. Show me that time, space, and matter, if those three things did not happen at the same time, you wouldn't have like that you describe as we would have. So I guess my ultimate thing would say that if you really wanted to stop an atheist in its tracks, they would have to prove to you that time, space, and matter could exist without anything. That's the easiest way to shut it down. If that's something that they're just bent on trying to prove.
Right. And that's why I believe a lot of scientists in the early 20th century thought that the universe was eternal and static, because then they didn't have to describe a beginning. They didn't have to describe why time, space, and matter came into existence out of nothing. So, really good point. And if you guys have any, if you guys like what you heard today, a lot of that is talked about in this book here. It's called Return of the God Hypothesis by Dr. Stephen Meyer. He's or was a professor at Cambridge University. I think it was he had his doctorate in philosophy of science. But he runs an organization now, and this really goes into a lot of stuff I talked about, like essentially intelligent design, genetic information, why it cannot be through evolution. So yeah, check it out if you're interested. We're going to move on to oh no, I forgot to put it up there. Shoot. Okay. Well, I will ask you guys the question. Sorry you can't look at it, but take a minute to review. We'll just say 30 seconds. I kind of went over that the cause of the universe had to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. However, I also said that it must be a free acting agent. So I'll ask you guys, why must the uncaused first cause be free acting? Anyone have an answer?
Repeat the question, please.
Why must the uncaused first cause be free acting?
Because then you're going to keep asking what caused it.
Right. Essentially, kind of build off your case. If it was, say, a material cause of some sort, even though there was no material, kind of like going over the primordial atom theory, which states that the universe existed in some mass point for an infinite amount of time before expanding to the universe we see today. Well, there's kind of a problem with that, because if that ball existed for an infinite amount of time, then everything that could have happened and would have happened in infinite time ago an infinite amount of times. So an infinite amount of time does not explain cause. At least it cannot explain a change if there is just a material cause. So this essentially means that the universe cannot cause itself to expand because everything that would have happened in an infinite amount of time. Does that make sense? Kind of? Oh, I'm not explaining that very well.
It's not, it's a lot of new words.
Well, what
Yeah.
you're saying is that there's not a limiting factor, right? Like if that's the case, then there can't be any limiting principle. Am I understanding that correctly?
Can't be any limiting.
If what you're saying is that, and I was a little bit distracted, but if what you're saying is that if the earth was everything was just evolved and was here for an infinite amount of time and there's no causal problem change, like we don't know why and all that, then, and you said, right, that then it would happen over and over again, supposedly, but then there's no limiting principle.
Right, saying that there had to be some particular event that happened to make that, say, very hot point expand to the universe we see today. It would have happened an infinite amount of times an infinite time ago. Think about it like this. There cannot be, infinite time is illogical because we would never reach today. There would always be another day before today. It's kind of, what's that? Yeah. So essentially, I've heard it described like this. Say if I was like, Ray, come up here, but in order to come up here, you have to take an infinite amount of steps. Well, he can't really do that because there's always going to be more and more steps he has to take before he gets here. In the same way, some point in the past would have to have more and more and more days to reach the present, but that could never occur because there's an infinite amount of time between the two. Yeah. Any other points on that? All right. Question 2. Could God have created the universe in a mature state? And essentially what that means is, could he have created it in the way we see today? Kind of also saying, did God create Adam in a mature state? Yes. So we're asking the same question. Could God have created the universe in a mature state? Right?
Theoretically, if you want to go philosophical, you could say, based on your own specific understanding of the universe, that God made everything already in a mature state at least for 40 years, or 42 years, or 47, however long you've been alive.
Isn't it like Frank Turkey says, well, I know the universe is at least 65 years old, and maybe like 82 because I trust my mom or something like that. But I like to kind of pose the question, when God created Adam, did he create him with a belly button? Kind of stating, did he create Adam to seem, if he did create him with a belly button, then you kind of have to ask the question why, because he didn't develop in the womb. So in the same way, if he created the universe young, and however it shows signs of maturity, why would he do that? And I kind of pose the question, if he did create the universe with signs of it being old, however it was young, would you consider that deceitful? Because in Numbers 23:19, it says, God is not a man that he would lie. Titus chapter 1, verse 2 says, in hope of eternal life, which God, who cannot lie, promised long ages ago, cannot lie. Oops. So I guess what are you guys' thoughts?
Well, created at the sign of being old according to who? If you're assuming what it would have been if you work back far enough, but that doesn't mean that that's where God would have wanted it to start. What like with the rotation of the earth, where it's incrementally slightly slowing down each year. And if you work it backwards, the amount of years that scientists say that the earth has been created, it would be spinning too fast for anything to live here. And so it couldn't, it logically disproves it. But if you work that back, you're assuming what should have been based on your belief how long ago it was.
Right.
So who's to say that when God created the earth in its maturity, that is what he meant it to be? We just keep working things backwards, assuming it's older, because there's a false premise that people believe it's older.
Right. I see what you're saying.
How would you prove that to an atheist? I mean, I'm not trying to start it. How would you prove that to an atheist? And in order to help plant that seed and give them doubt. I mean, if I were an atheist, I would say absolutely the earth would be spinning way too fast for life to form. But then we don't actually know that either. How would you prove that? How would I prove this?
How would I prove that the Earth would have been spinning too fast to not originate or basically destroy itself?
Or just to prove that it had to have I mean, you would have to almost you get into the idea of consciousness and things from there.
Right.
So I'm just thinking if I was out of
Yeah.
how can I?
Right.
You guys know who Alex O'Connor is? He is one of them from the probably what would you say, Gen X or not Gen Alpha Z or
Gen Z.
Gen Z's the most prominent atheist out there.
Yeah.
YouTube quality that literally brings back. He won't even argue to the fact that time, space, and matter have to be calibrated extremely thing, but it doesn't prove to him that it means that there is creator.
Right, because they'll probably go into the multiverse theory, which states that there could be an infinite amount of universes, and we're just the lucky winner.
And then I would say you don't have any proof of this
No.
multiverse theory because there's no, it's all pure philosophy.
You can't. Yeah, there's no empirical evidence of it. It's the same way. They have to have faith to believe that there's an infinite amount of universes there out there somewhere, but we can't see, hear, touch, feel, taste them. So, yeah.
This has always been hard for me, and I can't keep up with what he's saying. Like I have no idea about this stuff. But like so scripture says the fool has said in his heart there is no God. And like so I've always struggled with this, like with evolution or with atheism. Because the Bible tells me that if someone is trying to disprove that there's a creator, it's foolish.
Mhm.
And the way that I think about that is like, because like what you presented tonight, that is so deep and it's so vast and like the science behind it and everything. But when you boil it all down, it's really simple. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very simple. Like because nothing, like nothing. How should I say this? Something doesn't come from nothing. Like, and we see that all around us. And like you talked about entropy, like heading towards a disordered state, it's not getting better. And so like it's always been hard for me because like with evolution, like you get back to the causality, you get back to the fact that you look around yourself and things were obviously designed. Like you don't look at the Mercedes driving down the road and think, wow, that just happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I know this is what I'm saying. Like, this is very simple. Like, we know that. We know that in our heart, that it's like, we look at that Mercedes and we go, wow. Or maybe that's a bad illustration. But you know what I'm saying? We look at a highly engineered product and we recognize, we understand this was designed by something. And you can't look at creation and think this was not designed. Like it's foolish to think it's not. I mean, I think that's the way I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I would kind of add to that, like genetic information. That's like the longest, if you were to actually put it into a book, it's the longer than any book we've ever written. I mean,
Right.
there's so much information packed in genetic information. It's you through random process you cannot generate it. And that's what I tried to prove tonight. So we'll follow the law of causality for everything in this universe. The universe itself follows it as well.
Right. Because like literally with, because I've heard kind of evolutionists kind of argue the point, and it's like literally you can ask the question every time they come to something. You're like, and where did that come from? Like everything that they present, it's like, well, okay, where did that come from? Where did the primordial ooze or whatever they say come from?
Yeah. So with the abiogenesis, which is the study of the origin of life, essentially going what they believe, going from immaterial to organic material. How did it go from that state? Well, for one, that has never been proven in a lab. They actually cannot generate life from material, no matter what conditions they give to it. If they consider Earth in its early state, still can't generate it. Plus, it does not describe the origin of information. Still, even if you could generate organic material, it's going to degrade over time. It's not going to produce more information just because it exists. This organic material would be extremely unintellectual, I guess you could say. You're not going from matter. Well, okay. In our belief, it did go from matter to man, but that was through a designer. Anyway, I wanted to kind of end this, not this total thing. I have one more question for you guys, but for the second question I posed to you guys, which was the mature state argument. Psalms 19, 1-2 says, "The heavens tell the glory of God, and their expanse declares the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech." Sorry, my mouth is very dry. "Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge." So I like to think that we can look into the universe, and by studying it, we can come to a knowledge of God, which I believe is natural revelation. So yeah. Question 3, and this is our final question. It's actually not a question, it's a statement. I want to know how you guys would respond to it. I don't feel the need for God in my life.
I mean, if someone said that to us,
Yes.
well, we could call them fool.
Well, I don't know if that's the most motivating, but
JG said it.
thanks, JG. Well, the reason I bring this up, I was actually talking to someone, and they stated this. They kind of threw me through a loop, and I answered them in pretty much a personal, apologetic way, which would be, I can't. I feel the need for God. I cannot get away from it. Before I came to God, I was lost is not it doesn't describe it well enough. It's this feeling of emptiness, as if nothing matters. But when I finally came to the correct conclusion, it changed my life. It opened my eyes to what reality really is about. Before, I couldn't find a meaning to reality. There was none. It was a very nihilistic perspective. And I know, even if people don't want to think about it, if they claim they're nothing in particular, like we talked about before, they're thinking about this at some point. It's coming across their minds. What's going to happen when I die? It's going to happen to everybody. No one's omitted. I think in Hebrews chapter 9, 27, says that it is given for every man to die once. Something along those lines. Sorry, I don't have it perfectly memorized, but everyone's going to think about it. That's very good. Yeah. So I guess you guys have any other, how would you respond to them?
To go through life without any trials or tribulations and never experience God in their life, and they don't feel they have a need for God in their life. And
That's
then there's
true.
those of us that God, we feel his presence in our life. We've experienced his presence in our life in every aspect of anything that's happened in our life. And we know that he exists. We know he's part of us.
So are you saying that some people, I guess I'm trying to understand your initial point of saying that some people do not feel the need for God as if they have never been presented the need for God?
They've probably been presented to them, but they may not see the usefulness in their life. They may not feel like there is a purpose in their life. Maybe their life is going just perfect the way it is, and I believe that Satan allows that to happen. He
Finds them.
well he doesn't. Things don't occur in their life to make them want to turn to Jesus or turn to help for
It's
help.
kind of his way of keeping a hold of them.
Yeah.
Like Satan.
Keeping
So
them on.
if he keeps them happy, they're not gonna go to God.
Right.
But then God is always gonna be the one that's gonna intervene at some point, just like you said, even though they profess that they don't believe in God, they question. And that's all it takes is a seed of thought, right? To have God water that thought.
Well, and I think, the New Testament said, Jesus says that it's easier for a rich man to go through the eye of the needle than to turn his heart to the Lord. And I think largely because money solves a lot of problems. My husband has some family that has a lot of money, and they just kind of sail through life because any problem that comes, they just can pay for it.
That's the same person
They
I'm speaking
literally,
of.
what?
That's the same person I'm speaking of.
Oh,
yes.
is it? Okay, yeah.
That's what I'm speaking of, that
Right,
type of
yeah.
person.
Okay, but it's interesting because the wife, has several Buddha statues throughout her house. Now, she wouldn't call herself a Buddhist, but she's like, oh, it brings me peace. So I've talked to my husband about it several times. I think it's really interesting that they don't turn to God and they don't claim to need God or have need or sad, there's nothing they can't handle. And yet the hole's still there and they're still trying to fill it with, like I said, the little Buddhas or yoga, all those things. And I see that with a lot of their friends that they get together with. And I don't even know them that well because I can't do the things they can do. But so to me, the answer to a person who says, I don't need God, well, first of all, God puts it in our hearts to search for him, whether we see it or not, or acknowledge it or not. But also, we're all looking for something to fill that. So you may think you don't need God, but that doesn't mean you don't.
That's true.
So maybe so if someone said that to me, I would say a wise person would look in your heart and see if that's really true. Like look in your heart. Are you looking for hope? Are you looking for love? Are you looking for these things that God promises to provide?
Yeah. I like the analogy. Everyone has a God-shaped hole in their heart. Can't fill it with cash. You can't fill it with pride, and you can try, but it's like trying to shove a square peg into a circular hole. It's never going to work. There's only one answer.
I would probably tell them you don't need God. I would answer it by reaffirming it, because I would probably end up telling them it's not me that will tell you to change, it's only the Holy Spirit that will tell you to change. But if you don't believe that you don't need God, you don't. My thing would be, I would say, look at the transformations in people. With every single Christian that you encounter with a testimony or a witness, they always go through a transformation. It's never an emotion, never a feeling, it's a transformation. John Lennox, Dr. John Lennox said that he was interviewed by Steve Bartlett, which is Secretary of Yale. Steve Bartlett said to him, I've noticed that every single Christian that I've ever interviewed has a peace that he can't. And even though Steve Bartlett is an atheist, I think he's turning because he would say something like, I don't need God. Why would I need God? And I don't think John Lennox or Wesley Huff or any of them ever tried to tell him you need God. that's your own free choice. But you'll see a transformation, and you'll see that through the Holy Spirit that will change.
It's like in the book of James, you'll know the fruit. You'll know their faith by their fruit. So, yeah, it's a good answer. Thank you. Who is? You said Steve.
Bartlett.
Is he? Does he have a part in the middle of his hair?
No, he's an African American individual.
I've noticed that too. He's been interviewing some people, and I don't really watch it. I've just seen clips.
Yeah.
But he's been interviewing some people that he's curious, I guess.
Yes, he is. He's very curious for an atheist. And I've noticed how every single one that has interviewed, I have realized that with all these Christians around the world, they have this peace that, like, I know there's bad times, but I have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And I can trust in Him, even though I don't believe it's going to turn out well. But He knows already. So that peace carries me through. In fact, working at other places within the public, they all notice that. Why aren't you stressing? Why aren't you stressing about this or stressing about that? Because I know that God has me, and I don't really have the energy to put forth in that. And that's my peace. That's where my peace comes from. My transformation led to that peace. And when people at my work go, well, I don't need a God, then you probably don't, man. But I want you to know that I do. And I need them. I need Him. This is where it leads me. My own inner peace, my ability to talk to you, my ability to forgive you when I shouldn't, and things like that.
Yeah, I like the saying, like, God doesn't send you to hell, you bring yourself there.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be with Him in eternity, you don't have to be.
No.
And you don't need to be in eternity with Him. But if you want to, He gave that offer. That was quite a costly one. That's good. No, thank you. Thank you for everyone for your answers and statements, reflections. So I really appreciate it. I really enjoy communication. It builds one another. Iron sharpens iron.
Sorry, this is just one thought. Because one thing that I think people can't deny is love. And this is a very simple argument, but like when it comes to talking about, I don't know if it would answer the not needing God part, but whether there is a God, that discussion. Because it's like, no one can deny that you have this love for your kids or your family or your wife, your husband, or whoever. And you also, I don't think, can deny that you want to experience that love. You want to receive that love. And so, like, you got to ask yourself, like, where does that come from? Like, why do I want to love, and why do I want to be loved? And to me, that's because we're made in the image of a loving Creator. It's just thought, but because I don't think, like, some people may say they don't, but that's like when they say they don't need God. Then I would argue that they buried things. You know, the Bible says that Satan has deceived the minds of them. He's blinded the minds of them that don't believe. So there can be demonic deception going on. But I would also just argue that I think a lot of times people bury it. They bury that need. They bury that awareness of their lack of peace, however you want to say that. But I wouldn't know. I guess I wouldn't know how to get them to see that.
I think that's what the Scripture says, though. Like, you plant the seed, the Holy Spirit will do the rest.
Yeah, it may not be your seed that fermentates, but you could be a path for their salvation. That's really good. And that's like the kind of objective morality argument, same kind of thing, if there is love, where's it coming from? Where's this idea of objective morality coming from? And even objective ideas, like I think C.S. Lewis said, you can't find a single society on this planet that thinks that cowardism is better than courage. Like, you don't find it. So why? Why is courage better than cowardice? So.
Love is good. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting to me, even Stephen Hawking, before he passed away, he said, yes, and he was a very staunch atheist, but he said he felt like he was I can't remember the exact term, but basically a societal Christian. Like, he said that he was, basically he wanted to live as a Christian, or the morality of a Christian.
Yep.
But the denial of God, which, okay, you can try, but.
That's how most people are.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So if they can just look at the premise of that, okay, so why? God, again, God puts it in our heart.
I remember I heard this one video of this guy was doing a podcast, and a lady called in, and he pretty much asked her, he's like, do you think murder's bad? And she's like, yeah, it's awful. He's like, well, why is it bad? She's like, I think it's bad. Okay, so why do you think it's bad? It's just bad. Okay, well, trying to go down this question of why is wise, but she got into the circular loop problem where I think it's bad, it's bad, I think it's bad, but never came to the conclusion about why that was objectively bad. So, yeah, objective morality is one of the best arguments I think there is out there for apologetics. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna wrap up here. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. I know we're all busy and have many things to do, but I think this is important. So, yeah, I appreciate your time, and I hope this was a blessing to you and helped you.